This is the Strike Mash Boil podcast, presented by the Merrimack Valley Home Brew Club. This week we talk about smoking your own malt, we judge an Imperial Stout, and Matt Savage is back to finish the conversation about starting a homebrew club.
Welcome back to Strike Mash Boil. I'm Marco, president of Merrimack Valley Homebrew Club, and I'm joined by my co-host, Phil.
This week, we're going to finish our discussion with our founder, Mr. Matt Savage, and Matt is going to judge an Imperial Stout. But first, we're going to talk to you about how you can add some dimension and interest to your beers by smoking your own malts.
Yeah, so joining us this week for this discussion is a returning guest, Switzer, and new to the show this week is Karl. And you guys have heard me talk about Karl on the show a bunch of times. He's a man of tons of wisdom, so we thought he'd be a great addition to this week's show. Welcome back, Mike, and welcome to the show, Karl.
Thanks for having me. I've heard my name dropped a couple times. I enjoy it.
So since this is Karl's first time on the show, he has to answer the quick-fire questions. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. First thing that pops into your head, you get one pass. What's your favorite beer style?
So I just learned about the one pass, and I was going to use it. I was thinking about using it for this one because I do like pretty much all the styles. But gun to my head, I'm going to say Saison because it's just, you could do so much with it. You could basically make any style from it. It's kind of a cop-out. I'm going with that one.
Oh, I like it. It's good.
What's your least favorite beer style?
I'm not into the spice and herb beers. I mean, I can tolerate them, but...
So no pumpkin beer for you?
I like pumpkin flesh in beer. I don't like all the cinnamon and crap.
How about pumpkin THC beer?
I just saw that. That's ridiculous. That's not really
That's
beer,
for another
right?
show. It's for another show.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah, there's no alcohol. It's just THC.
Right.
For our listeners, Brett Bauer posted about a THC infused pumpkin beer. So maybe we'll have to get Brett back on the show to talk about the rant about that shit. Karl, what is your favorite beer ingredient?
I got to go with like Pilsner malt.
What is your least favorite beer ingredient? And this is not the show to say smoked malt.
No, I'm going to go with the reason why I don't really like spice and herb beers would be hibiscus. And you guys talked about this on the previous show, trying to describe the flavors and things like that. It's just something that, I equivalent to like hairspray. That's how I perceive it. So it's a nay for me.
Okay. What piece of brewing equipment could you never live without?
It's another difficult one. I've been brewing from, just regular burners to coolers to full systems. So, I mean, you need something. So I need a system to brew on. So there isn't any sort of single equipment. So maybe I'm going to pass on that one.
All right.
Okay. What piece of brewing equipment do you think is most overrated?
I got to say the conical. Everybody keeps saying that it's the,
interesting.
What the piece that they can't live without. It's, granted, I'm just getting to use one now. I'm getting used to it. Obviously, you guys have seen some blunders on the interwebs of me, but right now I'm going conical.
What is your dream piece of brewing equipment if money is not a factor?
I don't know, like a 7-barrel brewery somewhere in Methuen.
It's not a piece of equipment. It's a whole brew house.
Yeah, right.
If money is not an option, then I don't even have to sell it. I'll just brew it.
Tim threw down the shed or the barn before, so I think we can just do a whole brew house. That's fine.
There you go.
What beer topic, subject, style do you wish would just go away?
And it's not even just the style, it's the talk about it. It's the milkshake IPA. We like our beer. We know what we like. Just forget about everything else.
What is your desert island beer?
So it's got to be Arthur.
Oh, that's a good one.
I like, it's not only it's available, it's something you can acquire. It's not something that's super rare, but it's definitely something I could drink every day for the rest of my life.
When you aren't in the mood for a beer, what is your go-to cocktail?
I'm primarily a beer guy, but I don't turn down whiskey.
Any specific kind of whiskey? Because you got a couple whiskey lovers right here.
I know. I can't even say right now.
Yeah, equal opportunity whiskey lover. There.
If it's brown and distilled, it's for Karl.
That's right.
All right. Thanks, Karl.
I got to say that Karl and I, we've got the Hill Farmstead vibes. We got the Saison vibes. Karl and I are like best friends, basically.
Well, the reason why I said it was a cop-out is because you could have a hoppy Saison, you can have a dark Saison, you can have a clean Saison, a wild Saison, Brett, everything. So you can really do whatever you want.
You could have a spiced herb Saison, but you wouldn't like that.
I wouldn't like that.
I went Verame with my Desert Island beer, which is a little bit harder to find than Arthur. All right, so this week, guys, we're going to be talking about smoking your own malts. There are a ton of options out there for grains that you guys can get for homebrewers these days. And our local homebrew shop, Beer and Wine Hobby, has a metric ton of grains to choose from between crystal malts, Munich malts, roasted malts, and even some smoked malts. So the question here is, why would we do it ourselves? And smoked beer is something that a lot of us in the club really like. It's kind of a bit of a taboo beer style. So not everybody likes it, hit or miss for some folks, but we're kind of into it. So for folks that are into smoked malt, and if you're a home brewer, we thought, hey, let's talk about how you could do this yourself. Switzer, I'm going to kick it off with you because, between the four of us, you've got this pretty badass smoking malt system and you've experimented a bunch. So I want to hear why have you started doing it yourself versus just buying it? Have you seen some benefit from it? And, what kind of rig have you built for yourself?
I could talk for a while about smoked beers. And, for people that aren't into smoked beers or don't know about smoked beers, when you're malting, you've got to dry out the malt. There are a lot of different ways to do it. You could use the sun, you could use the wind, but a lot of it was done with wood. So they would start a fire to secrete that heat to dry out the malt, and you'd get that smokiness into the malt. It's a reason that Scotch has peat smell into it, and it's the reason that you get, when you're drying out malt with wood, you're going to get that smokiness from the wood. It gets into the malt, into the grain, and then when you make the beer, that carries over into the beer.
So, Mike, is it safe to say that at some point in history, all beers were probably smoked beers, or at least had some bit of smoke flavor in them?
I think so. I mean, if you're talking about historical beers, they probably all had some sort of smoke to them, depending on what wood they were using. It would be lighter if they were using, a lighter wood or a darker wood. But, they were probably all a little bit sour too because of, hygiene and sanitation and everything. But really, smoked beers kind of died out. When Pilsners took off and British beers, they wanted cleaner flavors when, they were able to isolate their yeast. It was just that drive for more consistency, cleaner taste, clearer beer. And they kind of went away, except for Bamberg, Germany. So in Bamberg, Germany, that tradition is still very much alive. Two main breweries there, Echte Schlenkerla and Spezial, are the two places that actually smoke their own malt, and they really love their Rauch beer or their smoked beer there. And that's really where I fell in love with the style, is going to Bamberg, having those beers there, always with really heavy German food, which pairs really well. They make this thing called the Zwiebeln. It's a meat-filled onion, which just goes so well with a giant mass of smoked beer.
Sounds wonderful.
It's fantastic, especially on a cold night. But those beers are still very much alive and loved there. What really drove me to smoke my own malt, we talk about smoked malts that are available. You can get them from Best and Weyermann, and there are other ones that are out there now. But really what you're mostly finding are beechwood smoked malts, which is what is typical to Bamberg. They use beechwood. Or now you can find oak smoked wheat, which is used in Grazer or Grodzicki, but that wasn't always available. That's more of a recent thing. So there is a limitation to the types of wood. And depending on what wood you use, you're going to get a different flavor in the beer. To answer the question, what really drove me to smoke my own malt, which is, an extra process, extra time, was I fell in love with beer from Echte Schlenkerla in Bamberg, and it's called their Eich Doppelbock, which is their oak smoked Doppelbock. And you cannot get oak smoked Pilsner or oak smoked Munich malt commercially. So I decided to make it myself. Really, the process isn't that complicated. You don't want to get your malt hot. You can denature the enzymes. You could end up ruining your Pilsner or your Munich malt, your base malt, and you wouldn't be able to convert. So the goal is to create a good amount of smoke, to do it in kind of a coolish environment, not too hot. And I've made a really simple setup. I took a little mini Weber grill. I took some, aluminum ductwork like you would hook up to your dryer. I cut a hole in the top of the lid. I connected that dryer duct to a big cardboard box because I didn't want to have a big, piece of smoky equipment hanging around for when I wasn't smoking, because I really only smoke a few times a year. But hooked it up to that cardboard box. I wet down the malt. So I took about 10 pounds of grain, enough to smoke about half of the malt in a batch, wet it down, got it nice and damp, put it on some aluminum screen, basically the screen that you would put into a screen door. Put that inside that box and just made sure that I had a good smoke that was rolling over that malt as it dried out. And I just simply took some oak, post oak that we'd use for smoking meat, put that in there and just let that smoke roll over the malt for a good hour. The other step that's important is letting that malt rest for a while. If you brewed with that the same day or the next day, you'd get some acrid flavors from that fresh smoke. So what you want to do is take that malt when it's good and dry after you smoked it, put it in some paper bags, and just let it breathe and air out for a while. Now, if you put that in your basement, your whole basement's going to smell beautiful, like oak smoke while you're waiting. I've waited, a week, 2 weeks to let that malt kind of rest and mellow out before I brewed with it. But I'll tell you, you get an amazing flavor from it. If you're looking for something consistent where it's going to be the same every time, then go and buy, Best or Wireman, get that beach smoke malt. And it'll be, as long as it's fresh, it'll be pretty consistent. But if you're willing to take a little gamble, you could smoke your own. But a lot of people will ask, how much smoked malt should I use? Usually when you start off, maybe 50, 60%, depending on how much smoke you like. But like most things, the more you have, the more you want. And so I'm at a point where I'm doing, 75, 80. Sometimes I did one with 100% smoked malt. And it was, pungent and strong, but a really good character.
Mike, you're making me think. I've only brewed maybe 2 smoked beers ever. I didn't smoke my own malt for it. I bought smoked malt for it. I can think of when I purchase the smoked malt, they don't actually say what kind of malt it is. It's just smoked malt. So now you've mentioned a couple of types of malt.
Yeah.
You mentioned Pilsner and Munich. Is that typically what you smoke? Is that where you've gotten the best results, or are there other malts? Like, how are you picking which malt to smoke?
I did Pilsner and Munich because I was going after that Eich Doppelbock. And so that Doppelbock has Munich and Pilsner in it, obviously. When you're buying Rauch malt at, Beer and Wine Hobby, wherever you go, it's going to be Pilsner malt that's been smoked. You can either buy Rauch malt, which is Pilsner malt that's smoked with beechwood, or you can buy the oak smoked wheat, which is their wheat malt that's smoked that you're going to use for a Grotzer. There are some other smaller malteries that are doing different smoked malts, but they're harder to get. And the beauty of doing your own is that you can use any type of wood you want. You can use applewood, pecan, mesquite if you want something really different. And you can actually go kind of crazy. And I did that this past fall. I went out on a limb and just said, I want to try something completely off the wall. And during the fall up here on the North Shore and most of the coast, they harvest salt hay, which is the hay that grows right in the salt marshes along the coast here. And they use that for bedding for animals. They use it for putting on fields as a nutrient. They use it for a lot of different things. But I can tell you, I have not seen any Google search talking about using it for beer. So I went out on a limb. I took that salt hay and I smoked some Pilsner malt with that. I used that and it smelled great. I mean, the nice thing is that you can know right away whether you like the smell of that smoke or you don't. I had no idea whether it was going to be terrible or not. But I made enough for a Helles, and I did my standard Helles recipe. And I went an extra step and, wash down some of that hay, get the dirt off it, make sure it was nice and clean. But I actually put that in my mash as a filter bed as well, just to kind of add it in another way. But I'm drinking the beer right now, and it's really unique, really fantastic, a really earthy, light smoke. I feel like I get a little saltiness from it, which I don't know is just psychological, but it's a great beer. And it's just, it's another completely off the wall way to, change recipes, to try something new and to do something different. I guess the first step is you have to enjoy smoked beers. So not everybody does.
Nobody else has Saute smoked malt on the planet. You are literally the only one. So you get to claim that one for yourself, which is kind of cool. And that's what's part of the fun of smoking your own malt is you're going to create a flavor profile that likely is going to be unique to you. And even if you're smoking things with a similar type of malt and similar types of wood, your process is likely going to be a little bit different, that you're going to just create a different flavor profile. Exactly. Which brings me to Karl, because, we hear Mike talk about this. Mike, you've got this pretty well thought out system. And, folks that are listening to this are going to say to themselves like, God, I'm not set up for that. Like, how the hell am I going to be smoking my own malt? I'm not, I don't have this, dryer vent rig that I've built to do it. Karl, you've smoked your own malt, and you've done a little bit of malt baking. I guess I would call it roasting, but it's not really roasting. It's more oven, baking. But you've done it in a much simpler method and have gotten some pretty unique results. You want to talk about what you've tried and what you've done before?
Sure. Another reason just to speak to supply and the reason to smoke your own grains. I mean, like you said, Mike, the smoked beer, that style isn't well liked by everybody. And so maybe your local homebrew store doesn't supply it all the time. Like if you want to make 10 gallons of smoked beer and you need 10 plus pounds of smoked grain, your local homebrew store may not have all that at all times. Like I know Beer and Wine only carries about 10 pounds at a time. They buy it in 10-pound sacks. They don't buy full sacks. So you can go there wanting the Beechwood and they may not have it. I mean, granted, if you plan enough time in advance, you can get anything you want online. But that's just another reason that you can, a reason to smoke your own. Other than, we're all home brewers. A lot of us like to cook, like to do things ourselves. So that's the other reason. Marco, what you're referring to is this Lithuanian style beer that was a baked mash. So basically, nothing's pasteurized in the whole process. You're basically what we did was we mashed normally, and then we stuffed it in the oven to basically create those caramel reactions and Maillard reactions to get some more different flavor profile out of that grain. Now, typically they would do a mash step, and they would fill these vats with the mash, liquid and all, mixed with the grain, and they'd stuff it in these large brick or clay ovens, and they would bake the mash for several hours, and you would see it would form a nice crust on the top. You'd get the conversion. Now, when we did it, we converted the mash before, but in this case, they're doing the full conversion during that temp rise as the internal is rising through the sack rest temperatures, and then it's starting to caramelize all that sugar. But still, there's plenty left over to ferment the beer later. And then they'll ferment it in like a clay pot, and they don't boil it or anything like that. And then they serve it as soon as it's fresh and drink it very, very fresh. So they don't have to worry about having it go bad or anything like that. So it's just kind of an interesting thing where we wanted to see what would happen to this, heating of the grain and trying to caramelize those sugars. It was a beer that was submitted to the Advent calendar way back when. It did produce sort of a strange flavor. I mean, that was, there's other variables, and we never tried it again necessarily in the same way. So we don't know where, if it's directly from the mash, if it was the yeast we used, if it was the hops, or any combination of the three. But it was kind of an interesting thing. And there's a few write-ups and videos you can search that style. It was kind of cool. It's kind of fun to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of really unique beer styles out there that utilize some different interesting mash methods. That being one of them. Something else that we did, which Karl, you can talk about the results of this, but, over the last 3-ish years, we instituted the annual club cookout. We bring our families, we have a big feast, we hang out. It's usually in August. And it's just a good time for us to just summer cookout, enjoy each other's company with our families. And normally we do barbecue, right? So that's like our big thing. Somebody brings the smokers, we'll do smoked ribs, pork butts, briskets, whatever it is that we normally do. And one year we said, hey, looks like the smoker's still going. All the meat's pulled off the thing. There's still a little bit of smoke coming out of this thing. You had this idea of a lot of us carry a bunch of base malt at home. You're like, let's throw some malt in a pan, poke some holes in the pan and throw it on the smoker and let's see what happens, right? So we did that with a couple of pans. You want to talk about, what we did? Because that's like, if you want to talk about the simplest method to smoke malt, it would be that. It was just on a standard smoker, holes in an aluminum pan, and smoke some malt.
Right. I mean, it was right off the cuff. We used the same, aluminum pans that we were serving the food in. And I'm not sure who came up. If it was myself or you, Marco, but it was definitely like, we were like, giddy little school kids, oh, let's smoke, jumping around. Remember jogging downstairs, ripping open the sack of Pilsner. There's no alcohol involved in this in any way.
Yeah, no.
No, we hadn't been drinking for 5 hours prior to that. No, that's not.
I remember I opened up a bag of Pilsner. It just goes like everywhere. So we filled the tray up. We poke as many holes. I'm not even sure we poked the holes in it. There was somebody else said that, you should have poked holes in the bottom of it. I'm like, yeah, you're right. So we weren't expecting anything great. This was like a bullet style size Weber, a fairly large one that we
One
were
of
using.
the vertical style smokers.
Yes, and it was just we had taken the food off and it had been sitting for quite a while, so there was still heat to it, but not a strong heat, and you could see it was still producing smoke. So we threw the pan on there, and we basically left it there almost until the coals were out, and it actually produced quite a smoky smell to the malt. So we packed it up, we bagged it up for later, and so the next month we were doing the jamboree. So we decided we were going to brew a beer with that malt and serve it at the jamboree, and we basically did like it was like an English pale ale was actually the base recipe, and we used this malt. We wanted to produce some sort of ale so we could turn it around quickly. It did well. I mean, it was perceived well. It had a nice subtle smoke to it, which I prefer in most of those styles of beer. Although I do like some of the crazier ones that Mike mentioned. The Bock that you're talking about sounds delicious. Not to mention the oak smoked malt that you're talking about too. So it was perceived well. It got votes. People came back for it over and over again. So it was like a success. It was like one of those things, off the cuff things. And in my brewing history, I've had a lot of oopsie daisies and things like that turn into something really cool. So it was fun.
Well, it's just an example of how easy it could be, right? It doesn't have to be a complicated process. We were fortunate enough that we were already smoking something, so we just took advantage of letting it burn out with malt inside of it. It didn't have that hardcore, punch you in the face smoke character that some, Rauch beers will have, but it had this really pleasant, subtle smoke to it that was really nice. And so for those that are thinking about diving into the world of smoking your own malt, it doesn't have to be that complicated. Now, if you want to make these really robust, smoky beers, you might have to, take a little bit more precaution to it, but not precaution, but more steps to achieving that objective. But if you're just looking to smoke some malt and experiment a little bit, it can be as easy as I'm wrapping up my smoker for the day, and I'm just going to toss it on there and try something new, without adding smoke to it. But, you've got these beer styles that utilize something as simple as, throwing your mash in a pot in the oven and seeing what happens. And it's a really cool, interesting stuff that you can do on your own and have some interesting results that'll create something unique for you.
I think it's great that you guys went with a pale ale. And I think a lot of people get stuck thinking that a Rauch beer has to be, and granted, many of them are. And the most, recognized examples are kind of that amber, richer German lager. If you go to Bamberg, Echte Schlenkerla and Spezial, they're doing a smoked Helles. They're doing different styles. So you can go light, and you can go light on the smoke like you guys did. Make it more of kind of a background character, which is awesome. And it's a really kind of a good introduction for people that might not have had Rauch beer, smoked beers before. And you can make it that light thing. And then you can go for, a hammer strike with a Doppelbock with just in-your-face smoke as well. So there's just so much that you can play with. Just a really fun variable to play with. And I encourage people to, start small. Maybe go to the store and look for Echte Schlenkerla or Spezial, good German example to kind of get your feet wet and understand what it should taste like. But don't be, bound in by that. You can really play with it, make it a creative element, and just you can make a beer that nobody's ever tasted before.
Yeah, what's that readily available smoked Helles, the commercial one?
The Echte Schlenkerla.
Yeah, I wasn't going to try to pronounce it because I would totally fuck that up. Yeah, which is beautiful.
Yeah, it's in cans now too, so you can get it even fresher.
Typically, when I drink smoked beer, I like how the smoke plays off with darker malts. I think that blend is really well.
So you're probably more of a Smoke and Dagger fan from Jack Savvy.
Yeah. So but on the flip side, like I actually really enjoy that smoked Helles that was just mentioned, because it's not a over the top smoke character in a paler beer. So I like when there's this. I like pale beers that have a subtle smoke character, but when it goes crazy, like using Jack Savvy as an example, like Fire in the Ham, that beer is, for a pale beer, a little too intense for me to like it. I think the darker malts kind of balance it out a little bit more. That's my personal preference. Folks out there that haven't had smoked beers, I mean, there's a lot of beautiful beer drinking to be done with some smoked beers. So you should definitely try it out. But I would ease your way into it and start finding some of those beers and the flavor profiles that will mix together for you. For me personally, if it gets too smoky and too pale, I'm not a big fan. But when you get a really intense smoked beer with some of those darker malts, I think it's a beautiful thing. So, and everybody has their own preference on that.
One place that smoke malt doesn't belong is when you're submitting Scottish ales in BJCP categories and competitions. You go look at BJCP.
Somebody's found out the hard way.
Yeah. No, I've never done it, but it is every time you read those Scottish beer descriptions, there's a big line in there that says smoke is not appropriate. Now you can put smoked malt in whatever you want, and Sean Dooley and I have brewed a Scottish style ale with some peat smoked malt. We just used a little bit because we wanted that scotchy type flavor, and it worked great. But you could not submit that in a traditional Scottish ale category in a comp. You would have to throw it in the smoked and wood category.
And be careful with that peat smoked malt.
The peat smoked malt is holy shit. Yeah.
There was a fantastic homebrew talk thread I was reading through years ago, and it was somebody talking about some ungodly percentage of their grain bill and asking if they should do it, and everybody resoundingly said, no, do not do this. And then we all waited days and days to see what this person would come back with, and the only thing they said is they finally tasted the beer, and it tasted, quote, like an open grave.
An open one.
It was fantastic.
I remember reading that one because we ended up going with in like a 10-gallon batch of Imperial style beer, so probably 8-9% alcohol. So it's probably like 35-40 pounds of grain. I think we used all of like 8 ounces.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave that nice, subtle, I would call it a Highland smoke, or maybe like Talisker Oban. It was not Ardbeg Lafroig, fuck all. You know,
Nice.
It's not Isla smoke.
I just want to throw that out there because I'm part of the Ardbeg cult. So
Me too.
You made me actually think of something really quick. I was earlier. We mentioned how in probably the early days there was likely smoked malt in beer, and they were likely sour. Are there any smoked sours right now?
Oh, there's a German style that's both smoky and sour, and I don't have it in front of me. I have not made one nor tasted one, nor do I desire one. I would maybe drink one just to see if I could go there.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things where you've piqued my curiosity. I don't know that I want 5 gallons or more of anything that's smoked and sour. But it piqued my curiosity.
It will surprise you. I thought Grodzitsky was insane on paper. I mean, you have smoke. It's 100% smoked wheat. So the first thing you're thinking is, I'm going to stick this mash. Then you're hopping it like a Pilsner. So it's like a hoppy, super hoppy smoked wheat beer, which you're really not supposed to put a lot of hops into a Rauch beer at all. So it kind of goes against everything. But and it's super low alcohol too. And so you're left with this like amazingly drinkable, it's almost like a smoked Gouda, spicy character to it. You guys have all had it. I know you have at meetings and
it was in our advent calendar this year.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. But it's an amazing style, and it's another way to play around with smoked malt. And I did fail to mention that you can get cherry wood smoked pretty readily at homebrew shops. I think Breeze does that. And that's a nice stepping stone too, because it's kind of a milder smoke. But, if you start 50-60% of your grain bill, if you're doing something lighter, maybe you go a little bit lower in percent when you're getting started. But it's just like anything. I mean, the first time you taste Lafroig, you say, oh my God, what the hell is this? But, then a little bit later, drinking the whole bottle yourself because it's amazing, and you get addicted to that peat smoke.
I think it's important to know that you don't have to make a smoked beer, with the smoked malt. You can use it as a character malt in a porter or a stout, and try it that way first, just to see how you can see it, if you can perceive it in the background or something like that. And some styles or some brands out there may even use smoked malt and you don't even know it. So if you like a stout and you happen to see on the ingredients, you can't be too surprised if you happen to see smoked malt on there.
Yep.
The worst beer I've ever had with smoked malt was at a brewery barbecue joint in New Mexico, right on the Texas border. And they made a mesquite smoked Hatch green chili pale ale. And it was horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. Mesquite just all up in everything. Not a good beer. Just, yeah. So stay away
Mesquite's
from
probably in the same, vein as peat, where
yeah.
you got to use a small amount because it's just going to knock you in the face.
That I just don't think it paired well with a Hatch Green Chili Pale Ale. Just a lot going on there.
Sounds rough for sure. Well, guys, I think this was a really great conversation about smoking your own malt, and we heard some really good examples of an advanced way to do it and really simple ways to do it. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to chat with us about it. Mike, Karl, really appreciate you guys joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If you like what you've been hearing on our show, hit that subscribe or follow button on your podcast service. And if you have any ideas or feedback for us, leave us a review or shoot us a DM on Instagram at StrikeMashBoil. Or join the conversation in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/MVHBC. All right, time again for this week's beer review. Each week, we're going to review a beer submitted to us by a member of the Merrimack Valley Home Brew Club or from one of our listeners. Our guest judge is going to walk through the judging process as if this were a homebrew competition. All they know is the category of the beer, which this week is 20C Imperial Stout.
First Imperial Stout for us.
First Imperial Stout, yeah.
Yeah, check that one off as a milestone. So joining us again is founder of Merrimack Valley Homebrew Club, Matt Savage, who also is a BJCP certified judge. Matt, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Matt, before we dive into this one, you want to give us a rundown of 20C Imperial Stout?
Yeah, sure. So this category is definitely, big time on the different flavors and that type of thing. So it's definitely a malt forward beer, but the hopping is fairly high, more so than you'd probably think as far as the IBU rate. And that's really to make it so the beer itself isn't cloying. So the high alcohol rate will dry the beer out, but also that the hopping makes it so that all that roasted malt, if you use chocolate malt, that type of thing, because there is the finishing gravity on this style is usually fairly high, and to help dry out the finish, the high hopping rate plus the alcohol really helps to round out that finish, so it's not unpleasant. As far as the style itself goes, the mouthfeel itself should be like, viscous, chewy, it's got a lot of sugar in suspension. This is definitely a sipper category. I think the category itself can go as high as, I think it's 15% or something like that. I mean, it's a fairly high ABV. I want to say it rivals, the American barley wine category or anything like that as far as, what the alcohol content can be. So this is a sipper for sure. Probably not something you want to drink when it's 90 degrees out.
Well, and I find that, or I think these kind of run a pretty wide range too. When you're talking about up to 15%, an Imperial Stout could be also as low as 8%, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and on those ones, it's difficult because like when you get this category, like you're saying, you could have some at 8, you could have some at 10, you could have some at 15. As long as they're done well, as long as the brewer is adjusting the hopping rate and things like that as far as what the alcohol percentage is, usually they work pretty well.
All right, great. So let's dive in.
Yeah, so on the aroma, it's like big time, dark fruit. I'm getting some, that roasted malt, chocolate, coffee, all the things you'd want to be seeing in this style. That's all from, roasted malt, as far as, it could be, chocolate malt, anything like that. They all kind of meld together. And it's almost smells like a chocolate coffee.
Yeah, it's interesting because it has that really unique blend of chocolate coffee, but also those dark fruit characters that you don't always think go together, but just seem to work in a dark beer like this.
Yeah, I mean, booze and coffee works really well, right?
It sure does.
Yeah, I think you can also like the aroma as well. I think you get a little bit of the alcohol factor in there. And as far as like the appearance is great. I mean, it's opaque. You can't see through it. It looks like a can of oil. The lacing on the side of the glass is beautiful. I mean, the carbonation is right on point. I mean, you don't want this to be highly carbonated because then you get that really carbonic bite, and I think it would also make the alcohol come out more than it should. So this style is more in like the medium low carbonation area.
Something that strikes me as kind of unique in this, and I can't think of too many beers I've actually noticed this on, but it's the head on this beer is like brown. It's not like that white frothy head. It's like this dark brown, which I can't really think of a lot of beers that I've noticed that on before.
Yeah, and I mean even on like an American stout or something like that, you're usually still on like the brownish tinge. But yeah, in a Russian Imperial Stout, there's so much roasted malt. The SRM is so high that even the head itself will become brown, like it's showing here.
All right, let's get into the taste.
Yeah, the taste. I mean, I think it hides the alcohol fairly well. I mean, it is a little bit warming. You're definitely getting like those roasted malt chocolate. The carbonation is slightly lower than I would have expected, but I don't think it's a ding to it. It's just on the lower end of the style. I want to see if you can get like almost like a dark cherry note to it.
Oh, cherry. That's an interesting character that I'm definitely getting, that I was trying to figure out which like dark fruit it is. Like a lot of times when I have Imperial Stouts, it's like that plum character, but this one is, it's a little bit different. That cherry note is pretty prominent.
Yeah, a lot of times, you can get some plum, you can get some raisin or something like that. But yeah, I would say this one veers more on the dark fruit end of it.
I get with that lower carbonation, almost it gives a little bit of a creaminess to the beer.
Yeah, it helps with the mouthfeel and like the perceived body of it for sure. Because if the carbonation gets too high, you get that bite at the finish that takes away, I think, from the body of the beer.
Yeah, this is another one of those. I'm looking at the guidelines. Another one that has sort of like a range. It says low to moderate for carbonation, and so yeah, like to your point earlier, like it's just low on the low end, but it could be a little bit higher. I'd be interested to see what a beer like this with that higher carbonation does, especially with some of that carbonic acid added with the alcohol, added with those flavors. It might be something that throws it off a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with carbonation too is a lot of times it will bring out a little bit more complexity in the flavors and things like that, and I don't think this is necessarily one-dimensional, but I would like to see a little bit more complexity in there as far as whether it be a little bit more hop bitterness or more of that malt flavor where it's like dark chocolate, but then it also has like a prune raisin type note to it too to kind of counteract each other. But I mean, yeah, it's definitely, I'd say, dark cherry forward. So it leaves a little bit, I think, as far as flavor could be as far as what the the recipe is as far as this beer goes.
So there's a real difference when you're going from an American Stout to an Imperial Stout. You're just ramping everything up.
So an American Stout, the hop presence in an American Stout is very apparent. It's almost like a super hoppy brown that would have more ABV to it and a little bit more body. Like the Americans, an English Stout would probably more closely related to a Russian Imperial Stout because the American hop character and that type of thing wouldn't be as prevalent in an English Stout. So it's like a bumped up English Stout kind of is what a Russian Imperial Stout would be.
All right, Matt, I'm going to put you on the spot. I did this to Nick a few weeks back. Difference between a porter and a stout.
Which porter?
Just American porter, American Stout. What the hell's the difference?
So an American porter would be definitely more drinkable, less hop character to it, be more on the malt side. An American Stout would be more on the hoppy side. But the difference between robust porter and an English Stout, you'd be hard pressed to be able to pick out the two, I think.
Yeah, because we were talking about this on one of our episodes, and somebody had submitted a porter, and I'm looking at it in the glass, I'm drinking it, I'm smelling it, and I'm like, if you told me it was a stout, I'd still think it was a stout. Like I wouldn't have any freaking idea. So it started some conversation, and Nick said that there's been a lot of discussion about it, and he basically shared, there's some mild differences between the types of malts that might distinguish them, but really same answer as you. Like you'd be hard pressed to really tell them apart.
Right. And I think you could do the same with some things that breweries call brown ales. Not to ding Treehouse, but Treehouse is Bear. That's a stout. That's not a brown.
Is it that dark? I swear I've had it before. I don't think I remember it being that.
It's very dark.
Oh yeah, all right, okay. Wait, am I thinking of Ma? Is Ma like the more amber beer they have?
I can't remember. So at Post and Beam, a lot of times, when I used to work on Fridays and stuff, people would bring beers in from different breweries and stuff just to get our opinions on what it was. I was like, oh, this is a good stout. He's like, no, it's a brown. I was like, no, it's a stout. But okay.
That seems like a bit more of a stretch for me, right? To like brew something and call it a brown and then have it taste and look like a stout.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is by far a bigger stretch. I mean, porter or stout. I mean, as long as you're not saying, and this is, I'm trying to brew an American porter and it looks like a Russian Imperial Stout. I mean, yeah, American Stout versus, American porter. All I think of is the body between the two. For a porter versus a stout, normally the stout would have a thicker body to it, and it'd be a little bit more viscous than a porter would be. But then you have a robust porter, which totally throws all that out the window. So
those damn, shaded lines between beers.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, that's, a good point too. When you're entering a beer, if you add things to it and you can't perceive them when you finish them, don't put it on the score sheet or don't put it on your entry because you're going to get dinged for it. You know what I mean? If you went into it trying to brew a stout and you think it's more of a porter, enter it as a porter, regardless of what you went out to.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about this before, if I remember correctly, I think Nick said enter it in both, see what happens.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting category. But we've mentioned on the show before, Phil, that if you say that this is my pineapple IPA, that shit better taste like pineapple. If it doesn't taste like pineapple, do not call it a pineapple IPA.
Yeah, if you call out a special ingredient, it better taste like that special ingredient. No shit.
The biggest one I find with stouts is maple. People always say, oh, there's maple syrup in it, but then it ferments all the way out. You don't get any maple character in it. Just enter it as an Imperial Stout at that point because all the ABV went up and it doesn't taste anything like maple.
I found the place you have to use maple in a beer is in the secondary because it'll ferment out for sure, but you're not boiling off all those compounds as if you added it in the end of the boil or even like in a whirlpool. So all those maple flavor compounds will stay in the beer if you use it in the secondary. Same thing with honey. Honey is the exact same way. A lot of volatile compounds in there. So if you're going to use those kinds of flavors in a beer, do it in secondary fermentation or right at the end of primary, something like that. Don't put it in the kettle.
Well, you're saying secondary, and you mean like at high Krausen?
Yeah, high Krausen shortly thereafter. Yeah, we will probably have a show on primary versus secondary. Should you do it? Should you not? All that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, like as fermentation is starting to wind itself down.
I've had better results with honey and maple syrup actually with using it to carb the beer. So
to prime.
Yeah, me too.
The keg, and then all those volatiles stay in the keg. You know what I mean? As long as it's sealed and that type of thing. It takes a long time, but as far as the biggest maple flavor I've ever had in a beer, I poured a bunch of maple syrup, racked on top of it, and forgot about it for a couple of months, and then came back to it. And it was delicious.
I've bottle conditioned beers with honey, and you got to be careful because different honeys almost like have different. It's weird. You'd think honey is the same. They have different flavors, but the sugar content would be the same.
Oh, just I mean, even on the season, depending upon what season it is, your honey could have a different sugar rating.
Yeah.
Well, so how the fuck would you know that?
You really test it.
Sure. But we're not going to.
Who the hell's going to do that? Well, I mean, I guess if you're homesteading and you're really that curious about it, but like.
Yeah, I should have 2 beehives in April.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm surprised you don't have a single beehive yet.
The ones I've done, Marco, I've used it in the bottle priming for like Belgian Saison. So if you get medium carbonation, you're good. If you get a really high carbonation, it's a Belgian beer. That's fine.
Right.
So I wouldn't do it for an English beer where, holy shit, I got, you're trying to put honey in a bitter and you end up with a super highly carbonated bitter. That's not going to fly. But Belgian beers, oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could even do it, to be on the safe rate, right? Like do 75% your normal sugar, 25%, maple or honey or whatever your other thing is going to be. And like you said, give yourself a little bit of a ceiling as far as what the style would be. So if you do overcarb, it's still within style.
Yeah, and I would just suggest that folks there's a lot of really great calculators out there in measuring the priming sugar because it's not all the same. If it's telling you need 4 ounces of dextrose, it's not 4 ounces of honey. So make sure you use one of those calculators.
The best one out there for all the different sugars I have found is the Northern Brewer calculator, which I'm happy to give a thumbs up for because they're no longer owned by Anheuser-Busch InBev.
I think there's a spreadsheet roaming around in the internet as well that you could do as far as like, this is the amount of beer, this is what my final gravity is, this is the thing I want to try adding to it, and it'll give you like a roundabout answer as far as what you can add.
So now that we've gone completely off the rails and away from what we're actually here to do, back to the beer, Matt, overall impressions and a score.
Yeah, so I think the aroma was good. I thought that the appearance of it was good. Thought it was a little one-dimensional as far as what the flavor is. So I'd probably be in I'd be in the 35 range. I think it's within style. I think it has a little bit of room for improvement, but I don't think there's any, glaring flaws with the fermentation of it or anything like that. I just think it could use a little bit more complexity as far as the flavor goes.
Great. So I think that wraps up another judging for us. Matt, again, thank you for joining us. And you got to break in the Imperial Stout category for us. So we really appreciate it. And we look forward to having you back.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Last week, we had to cut our talk short with Mr. Matt Savage. Well, let's pick up where we left off.
But you're doing some different stuff now. What are you guys up to now?
Yeah, so we moved out to New Hampshire to get a little bit more bang for our buck as far as land goes. When we sold our house in Drake, we couldn't really afford to buy a similar house in Drake anymore. And really, I work in New Hampshire, so I wanted to take the income tax break. But the main reason for it was to kind of start homesteading some land and, doing some orcharding and that type of stuff. And also to, potentially soon open a brewery up here. It's as far as the laws go and that type of thing in New Hampshire, it's a little bit easier to open a brewery. There isn't as stringent laws. And as far as the cost goes for licensing and stuff, it's easier up here. So that's why I started working at Post and Bean Brewing in Peterborough, to try to get some hands-on experience as far as from the business end of it, what needs to be done as far as a brewery, how much it costs, the pricing point, that type of stuff. But, hopefully in the next couple of years, you'll see Savage Bull Brewing.
So that's what you're rolling with?
Yep.
And is the idea of the homesteading to be something that works in conjunction with the brewery, or is it just to be more self-sufficient?
Oh, no. So, yeah, definitely both. I mean, my dream would be to, have, certain things that I grow on my own land that I use for, because I'm big into sours and that type of stuff. So we grow peaches and cherries and blueberries and that type of thing. Cucumber saisons would be something I'd be interested in doing, that type of thing. From the property that we have now, whether it be, scalable to a brewery, I'm not sure. But yeah, that would be the idea. I mean, we might start somewhere and then, move to a place where we could actually have, a bit of land and that type of stuff. But as far as, entry to the market and stuff, we're just trying to get out there as soon as we can.
So is this on the horizon? Are we going to see Savage Bull pop up anytime soon?
Yeah, hopefully. I mean,
is it too soon to talk about that?
Yeah, we already have our logo, that type of stuff. We have a Facebook group, Savage Bull Brewing. We just.
I don't think I'm part of that group. I'm gonna look it up after we're done here. I'm gonna be looking it up.
Yeah, my goal would be 3 years. We'll be open. Your
partner in this venture is a former member. He's sort of an off and on member of Merrimack Valley Home Brew Club. Is Alec Bull?
Yep. Yeah, Savage Bull. Yep, that's where the name comes from.
And Matt Savage and Alec Bull. It's like, I got to tell you, it's a brilliant fucking name. I love the name Savage Bull. It's perfect.
I know that's usually the hardest thing is coming up with a name for the brewery. So usually, luckily we had good last names.
Yeah. And you guys are Savage Bull is going to be known for what? Is it going to be saisons? You guys are going to be
We have to give the people what they want. So we'll do some hazies. Well, that type of thing. But yeah, I mean, we'd like to have a barrel program. We'd like to have that type of stuff. What we'll do from the get-go, we'll probably be, traditional styles, do some dry stouts, do some imperial stouts, do some saisons, some hazies, that type of thing. Probably some, kettle sours and that type of stuff. No milkshake IPAs. You won't see that from me, but
it's one thing to have a hazy IPA. It's another thing to have a milkshake IPA or a ranch dressing IPA.
Yeah. I mean, from my own standpoint, I think lactose only is good in a stout. That's where I like it. It gives it that creamy mouth feel. Not even a milk stout. You could put it in an imperial stout, in just a little bit to add some creaminess to it. But yeah, you won't see lactose IPAs coming out of us.
Which is why I will be frequenting your brewery when it is open, because I know that I'm going to get some badass beers. And if I want a New England IPA, which for the record, for the people, the naysayers out there that say Marco shits on all these beers, I like New England IPAs because they are still a beer. So Matt, I think I'm kind of curious about is, so obviously the life cycle of you in beer starts with you doing this shared brewing thing up in Nashua at Incredibrew, all the way to this point where you're like, I'm going to open a brewery. And I wonder how much being part of the Home Brew Club had sort of inspired and drove that passion for you. And if you got a ton of benefit from other people's ideas and innovations and, wacky thoughts on beer. And if that helped kind of accelerate your passion for it and drive you to want to do this as a career.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, early on, Mike Switzer especially was, a big influence on me because I really hadn't met any homebrewers at that point that were even thinking about lagers or doing, even German style beers besides maybe like a Hefeweizen or something like that. He was one of the first that was like, oh, I did this German Pils. I was like, okay, so, is this going to be like a Budweiser or whatever? I didn't know enough about it at the time to really appreciate it. And then he, started bringing them to meetings and stuff. I was like, oh man, this is unbelievable. So that really got me on like the whole lager train type of thing. And then Joe doing, he did hazies from get-go. I think, he was just doing, IPAs. Yeah, doing IPAs from the get-go. And I mean, his beers have really progressed a ton in the time that he's been part of the club. His beers are solid. Regardless of what you think about, the ingredients he might add to certain things, I mean, his brewing practice is spot on, all the time.
Yeah, we give him tons of shit. And for those, because nobody knows who Joe Devanna is, they only know Mr. Lactose. Joe Devanna equals Mr. Lactose. We give him a ton of shit. And I said this to him when we had him on the show, that as much shit as I give him, the beers he makes are fire. And not just his New England IPAs or the Imperial Stouts that he makes. The guy also kills it in Pilsners, sours. I mean, the guy runs the gamut on the styles that he knocks out of the park.
Yeah, for sure. And then when Nick joined the club, that was our first national judge, so to be able to bring beers into a meeting and stuff and get some, honest feedback about, what you thought, because a lot of times early on, especially, we might not have had as many, tasting of homebrews as you guys probably have now. A lot of times it would devolve into, just a, beer share or that type of thing. Because we had a lot of people that were interested in beer, weren't necessarily brewing yet. And I think right before I kind of moved to New Hampshire and then you guys took over, we started to kind of, progress that into being a little bit more about homebrew and a little bit less about, commercial beers and that type of stuff. So to have Nick part of the club, that was nice. Because, I mean, his beers are always spot on for the most part from, my experience, and to get some feedback from a national judge was really cool. And then, I mean, Phil, I think you joined right before I moved to New Hampshire as well. Yep. I remember you coming to my house and drink it, and I mean, you were another lager brewer, which was nice to have as part of the club to, get those experiences. Because I think for a little bit we were like super, hazy IPA heavy. I was starting to get sick of that for a little bit, but
I was a long-term lurker of Merrimack Valley Homebrew Club. I wasn't, I mean, I'm right here in Tewksbury, so I'm not far away. But I wasn't sure what a homebrew club would buy you. Mm-hmm. And I don't even remember how you and I got connected, but you invited me over to your place, and Joe was there, TJ was there, Aaron Soretti was there, there were a couple other folks there, and it was just like, holy shit, these guys are making, it wasn't even a real meeting. I think it was just like a Saturday get-together or something. Or
yeah, it was just a cookout, yeah.
Yeah, and there were all these homebrews there, and it was just like, shit, I have been missing out, because I have friends who no offense to them, but no matter what I brewed, they were blowing smoke up my ass that this is the greatest fucking beer on the face of the earth.
Free beer will do that to people. Yeah. If it's free, it's awesome.
So I think from your place, I went to a meeting at TJ's house, and I brought my homebrew, and I got legit freaking feedback. And it was like, damn, this is what a club buys you. It's guys who not only share the same passion as you, but want to grow you as a brewer, but then turn around and say, man, that was really great. Here, try my beer. What do you think? What are your thoughts? What can I do better? And now you're providing feedback as well.
Right.
And we still do the commercial thing, but yeah, I remember early on when I started with the club, it was tough when it turned into a beer share, because it was like, hey, I've got this really great, Imperial Stout I want to bring. And they're like, well, hold on, we want to pop this bottle of Good Morning from Treehouse first. Let's try that. And I'm like, fuck, I've got to follow this. I'm not getting any good feedback. Or it's like, hey, I got this great double IPA. Awesome. I ran up to Vermont and I got Double Sunshine. Let's try this first. And I'm like, fuck, that's what I'm following. Yeah. So it got tough. And we do that today. That hasn't changed in our meetings, but our rule is we do only homebrew first. Once we are done with the homebrew, we'll do the commercial thing, but we want to make sure everybody gets their fair share.
Yeah, and I think that's a better way of doing it. I mean, back in the day, I mean, a lot of the guys that were in our club too were big time, beer advocate traders and stuff like that. So it's like, I have this homebrew, but you have, 3 bottles of beatification. Yeah, all right, we'll do the beatification. You know what I mean?
You think?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was difficult too, because I was, I didn't want to be a stickler like, this guy didn't have homebrew this time, so I wanted him to still be part of the group and that type of thing, and not feel like we were leaving him out. But yeah, I think the way that you guys are doing it now is an easier way of doing it. I think I was maybe a little bit too easy when we were originally opening, because I didn't want to like all of a sudden piss off a bunch of people and have everybody leave the club type of thing.
Matt, you're making it sound like I'm a dictator, and I know I understand that there are some folks out there, Nick Griner, that might say that I am a dictator, but that is not how it is. We're not like that. But I will say, though, the thing that I found the most valuable early on, and I'm curious how this impacted you, just listening to people talk about beer, and then even the wacky ideas that people had. And there's folks on the podcast, they know Dana. Dana's done a bunch of he's one of our BJCP certified judges. He's done some of our tastings for us. And he always had, at least at the time that I've been part of the club, some really zany ideas for beers. But just hearing how he talked about and how his thought process was, and being able to formulate a recipe and why he thought things would work together, I would just learn a ton from that and would apply it to how I brewed. I imagine that's always how it's been.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, people just bouncing ideas off each other, because especially, I mean, you think about the time that the club has been around and all the new hops that have come out, right? So you like, oh, I use this hop, how did it taste? So I don't have to waste 5 gallons of beer trying to brew this hop if I don't like it. You know what I mean? Like, back in the day, I mean, when the Homebrew Club first came about, Citra wasn't even a thing. Like, I'd never even heard of Citra when we were
12 years ago.
Yeah, never even heard of it. Yeah. The only thing you could brew with was like, you brew Centennial, Cascade,
Columbus,
Simcoe, those types of things. So it wasn't like these big Galaxy, Nelson, those types of things. So, to hear people, oh, have you heard of this new hop Citra? I tried it in this thing, it seems to work, with this, style IPA, with this base malt or whatever. And yeah, Dana, saying, oh, I'm going to do this thing with, these crazy ingredients or whatever, or even just people's process. I'd be like, oh, well, last time I did this thing, and when I lauded, I didn't get as much as I thought I was going to get, or it was too murky, or that type of thing. Like, what do you guys do? Or, my hot break wasn't great this time around. What did you guys do for that? Or what do you have for a chiller? And, how do you manage your flow into your chiller? Or, do you have because I mean, when I started, we built a thing out of copper, and I was just like, bouncing this thing around. Then someone was like, oh, have you ever heard of counterflow chiller? And I was like, no, I have no idea what that is. He gave me a link to it. I built one out of a hose with the same copper thing. And I was like, oh man, look at this fucking thing. And chilling in like a half hour versus bouncing this stupid thing around for 2 hours.
Dana's been in the club for longer than I have. I know what his craziest to date beer idea has been. I gotta know. I can't imagine Dana's the kind of dude that hasn't always been thinking about wild and crazy beers forever. Can you remember a crazy beer that Dana brewed or talked about brewing?
I can't off the top of my head. I'm sure there is one though out there. I mean, he did traditional styles for a long time, and then he all of a sudden like bounced out and started like throwing stuff into like Hefeweizens and shit like that. And I was like, all right, man, whatever. I mean, like, I'll try it. I don't necessarily think this is going to be good, but yeah, whatever.
Phil, what's your craziest Dana beer?
It has to be pizza beer.
Oh, well, you think that's the craziest?
It's maybe not the craziest, but absolutely the most memorable.
Yeah, I mean, he stole basically the National Homebrew Competition show with that damn pizza beer. I think about two things. Dana did this like will it beer thing, and he basically wanted to know if ranch dressing would turn into beer, so he like blended ranch dressing with beer.
Yeah, he's never done anything that crazy.
And then there's the Kolsch slaw idea that he has, where
he put cabbage in a Kolsch.
I think he's got more crazy with his old age.
There's no doubting that. He did the mushroom beer. Did you ever have the mushroom beer?
Yeah, that was, and he did the acorn beer, which was pretty good too.
Yeah, he does the
beer,
acorn coffee. He does that. Yeah.
No, I remember the acorn beer. That, okay, that takes the cake.
I think he's done mushroom beer a couple of times, or someone else.
Mushroom beer he had, like, I would have never thought to add mushroom to beer.
Yeah, and a dark beer gives it like an earthy.
It was good. It was really good. Yeah. I think would be great for folks that are listening to this show is, because we've got listeners all over the world. I can say that now because Phil tracks this shit. So we know we have listeners all over the world. And Merrimack Valley Home Brew Club is a small club by design, will never be a huge club. So unfortunately, membership is limited. So folks that are saying, damn, I really want the love and camaraderie that those guys show on that show every day. It's tough love, but it's love. It'd be great if you could just take somebody through what are the, you've done this for a long time. You went through it all. When you're putting together a homebrew club, if you were going to suggest to somebody, like, here are the 5 things that you've got to make sure that you've figured out to organize the club.
Yeah. I mean, so the first would be, at least know of a couple members that are going to be serious members that are going to show up, early on. We had, a solid group of probably 4 or 5 guys that were going to show up at every meeting. Because if you have, all of a sudden you start blowing up, but only people are, just paying the dues and never showing up, then the meetings really don't have, they're not going to pull in more members, because you need people there to be interacting and to be an actual club. Otherwise, you're just an internet club, and you could do Brew Network or whatever the Christ you want to do for that. The biggest thing would be signing up on the AHA site, to get it in there so that people search when they move to a new place or they're looking for a club or something like that, you show up. I'd say the second one would be a Facebook group. Just so that people could search it. You could have a link in the AHA one or something like that would go to this Facebook group, so you could have communication with people before they actually came to a meeting or something like that. I would say also, either a website or some sort, like BFD kind of does like it's like an email group type of thing or something like that, where you can communicate out. Because, a lot of times, I know that when we started getting bigger groups of people coming up, putting your address on a Google Calendar became an issue at that point, right? Because you're going to have so many people there. You don't want people that aren't invited showing up or something like that. So that would be a big thing to have some sort of, website or an email group or something like that. And then you really have to think about how many people you're going to have there, and then also the consumption factor, right? You don't want people getting tanks at your house and then leaving, because then you're kind of held liable for that. Then also you need an initial idea of what your group is actually even going to be, right? Are you going to try to promote, people getting better at brewing? Do you just really want to be a group that's going to brew together? What is your premise for the actual group? Because you don't really have that, then you don't have a group. You need an idea of what you actually want to achieve as that group. Do you want to do competitions? You just want to be a group that's going to brew together every so often? You just want to have people to bounce ideas off of and try your beer, that type of thing.
Yeah, so it sounds like this isn't much different than starting a business. You're essentially establishing some core values. You're establishing a mission. You're getting some, let's say, followers, some sort of group that will come along for the ride. And then having some level of organization to think through where you want to be, how you want to be there, how you want to tackle it. Our club now has gotten a little bit, we've been doing this for a while, so we've learned some things over time. Like, we have insurance now to cover ourselves for liability. If you're starting a club, you're likely not going to have insurance out of the gate, so you got to think through some of those things. But we've thought, like, all right, we've got to manage risk now. We've gotten more organized, like all that stuff. But it sounds like those are the things that you really want to be thinking about, is just making sure that you're thoughtful on why the hell do you want a club to begin with? What's the purpose of your club? What's the values of your club? And then having a group of folks that fit into those values.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's a good analogy is, starting a business. You're not necessarily looking to making a profit or anything like that, but yeah, having your business statement, that type of thing. Why do you even want to do this? Because if you can't come up with that, I mean, there's no point in even doing the club because you're just not going to have your heart into it. I mean, you're just going to fall apart quickly because you really, for those first 2 or 3 years, I mean, it was really just me keeping the club together, making sure that people were organized and that type of stuff. I mean, once you can, span some of that out where you have members that are going to be there for a long period of time, because I mean, we had members, be there for a few meetings, drop out, and we have new ones coming in. But once you have those core people and you can start putting out officers and that type of stuff, that's when the club becomes more solidified. You know what I mean? Because then there's more people taking stock in your club besides just you. So that's really what keeps it together and make it, progress out type of thing.
Yeah, no, I think the foundation that you laid for the club has thrilled and excited with the things going on in the club today, as I'm sure that it was when you first started the club. We've got excellent engagement. The mission is basically the same. Like when you think about what you were just talking about a little while ago, we're doing those same things today. And coincidentally, like it's just when I joined the club, the feeling that I got from the values of the club right out of the gate are how we wanted to continue it. And that's how we've continued it. And then I think those values are there with development and learning and making it about homebrew. But the commercial stuff and all the other stuff is still important because it's still an opportunity to learn and to digest information and talk about beer and just share that passion and growth in homebrewing. Homebrewing is as big of an industry now as it was. I mean, it's a huge industry right now. There's some argument to be made if it's worth making your own beer today because there's so many options available at relatively good prices of really great beer. So can you really make a beer better than what you can buy for less? Probably not. So you're really doing it because you're interested in the craft and learning and all that stuff. But I mean, that foundation that you guys laid 12 years ago still lives strong with the club. And we always say to folks, like, if you want to grow in home brewing and really develop your craft, probably one of the best ways to do it is get yourself part of a group that does the same thing. They're going to lift you up, and you're going to lift them up at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the same thing could be said, right? Like with people that like to cook, right? You could go out to a restaurant, get better food, but if it's a passion that you have, it's the enjoyment that you take from it, regardless of what the end product might be. You could screw something completely up, but that brew day was like, the best time you had that whole week. You got to hang out with your buddy or whatever. You got to do it by yourself or whatever the case may be. You got to go through a thought process of making that recipe, that type of thing. I mean, and I think you're correct, as far as, the club goes with the, instilling the values and stuff. I think that was why it was like a seamless transition over. I mean, I think you and TJ and Nick and everybody else that took, leadership roles in the club once I moved up to New Hampshire, had the same ideas and premise and stuff of what the club should be. And I think that's why it's worked out so well.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this has been an awesome chat, and I love catching up with you. We don't get to see you enough anymore. Living in New Hampshire and doing your thing up there, we've got you to come down to a couple of meetings. So it is great when we do get you to come down and we get to try some of your beers. But hopefully we can see you soon, especially with this whole pandemic thing. We're not really seeing anybody right now, but we hope to catch up soon in person, not on this virtual stuff. Have some beers, enjoy each other's company like we used to. I'm dying to get back up to your property because the last time I was there, the homestead was a work in progress. I feel like it's probably gotten like full-on fledged mini farm up there right now is what I'm expecting the next time I get up there. But we really appreciate you taking the time with us and talking with us and sharing the Merrimack Valley Home Brew Club story and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. This was great.
That's it for this week. Next week on the show, we're going to talk through our favorite homebrew books, from some nice light reading to some really intense, deep-divey stuff. And we're going to judge a Kolsch, so stay tuned for that right here on Strike, Mash, Boil. The Strike Mash Boil podcast is produced by the Merrimack Valley Home Brew Club, an AHA-sanctioned club. Follow us on Instagram at Strike Mash Boil. Join the conversation in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/MVHBC, or send us some feedback at strikemashboil@mvhbc.com.